So here at Quirky Ecologies, I'm presenting the project Scotopoesis, which is a performance piece that unfolds over 19-20 hours. It tries to establish the so-called intercognition between humans and plants. Basically, it's an attempt to reach into the plant's cognitive sphere, if there is such a thing, by addressing their perceptual milieu, so the senses that they actually have. There's different senses that plants have, like they can sense chemical compounds, lights, maybe they also hear sound. But in this case, I'm using actually light as the communicating medium with the plants. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm very interested in plant otherness. They are aliens living amongst us. They are macroscopic. We can interact with them, yet they somehow fade into the background. And that's because they're ontologically different from animals and different from humans. So there is actually no possibility for humans to feel true empathy with plants. So plants are challenging in that respect, and that's why we are commodifying them to the extent that we are. And I thought it would be a really interesting contribution to our knowledge in general, to try to use the artistic approach to explore different possibilities in this plant-human relationship. And I was motivated in part by also my training as a biologist, my previous life that I spent in labs trying to use science to understand living organisms. But I somehow also felt a bit frustrated or was unsatisfied with what knowledge, what science offers. And instead I chose to expand those experiences with artistic practices, artistic research, which is still very much experimental research. The project unfolds as such. There's a field of cress. Cress is actually a spice that you would put on a sandwich otherwise. But the cress is germinating and growing. It's illuminated by a projection light, but I'm standing in the path of the projection light, casting a shadow onto the cress. And so after these 20 hours, slowly the cress is reacting to the shadow by changing its morphology. This is a natural process that otherwise happens when plants find themselves under the foliage of other trees and they can't reach the light, so they actually grow thinner, longer, paler, all in an attempt to grow out of the shadow and into the light. So it's kind of tapping into that natural reaction. When I researched the possible modes of intercognition with plants, I really had to adapt to plant senses, plant time, plant principles, and this was extremely, extremely challenging. Most people, artists, and just general science approaches plants through technological interfaces because they sort of serve to bring this plant's slowness and plant time closer to our senses. And I found that a bit problematic because it turns out that we are very much used to technological interfaces. So when given choice, you would rather interact with the interface that is made for you, that is easy, than the object, or in this case, subject behind the interface. So I felt it was kind of almost unethical to do that, to anthropomorphize using, time lapse or electrodes that would measure some sort of response. And instead, I felt that it would be an interesting experiment, also for me as a person, as an artist, to commit myself to this plant time and to really the conditions that they require to perceive or to interact with their environment. So yes, here I got myself into this project where I have to stay still for such a long time. It's also personally a huge challenge because I'm a very kinetic person, can hardly stay still, and I think on the other hand this expresses the sincere commitment, a very humble one, I would say, to try to understand plants, you know. So that's that. On the other hand, while the cress is growing, I would say it's, you know, kind of reacting, but it's not necessarily the ideal conditions. So I do anthropomorphize and say, well, if the cress is suffering, but so am I, you know, on the other hand. And as the cress is elongating, I'm actually shrinking because of the standing for such a long time. Some water gets squeezed out of the vertebrate discs. So there's a sort of mirroring effect that is happening. We are here because of an excess that plants produce, because they're tapping into the solar energy, and basically the whole energy cycles on Earth are made possible through this sun. When the sun is gone, we will also be gone. We heard a lot about how we have to let plants grow and sort of cultivate them in gardens and conserve them. And I think this is a bit perverse, because plants have this enormous vitality and this potential. Like, given the chance, they would take over everything immediately. We see this in areas like Chernobyl, right? After humans go, plants are just like everywhere. So I don't know if it's this humility is not necessarily one of being ashamed of human dominance, but rather looking at the situation as it is and addressing our own fragility in relation to plants who are actually have been here longer and are in a way much more powerful. But on the other hand, I think there's also a direct addressing of the metaphysics of Western society, so just the way we philosophically understand our being and our relationship to other processes, other living beings in the world, which has this, of course, this legacy from Enlightenment, where everything was oppositional, binary, and the humans were clearly on top of the hierarchical pyramid, and with this amazing mind, which is actually above all, right? And actually, that system kind of fails. And it's failing in a very real way, even if we just consider new scientific discoveries, right? So we are now all of a sudden not one, but composed, not of just mammalian human cells, but also of microbes. And so there's kind of a porosity that is appearing that requires a different understanding of the world to be able to integrate this new knowledge. So plants have always been, let's say, the weeds of metaphysics, to quote Michael Marder, because they simply don't fit in the system we've created. So by perhaps thinking about a system that would easily acknowledge plants, we might be getting to something that is more useful for us, even like in our day-to-day, technologically imbued societies. So other projects I've done. So this scotopoesis is actually one of a series of projects that addresses plant otherness. Within this one is also phytoteratology, which uses my hormones isolated from urine, steroid hormones, to assist this embryogenesis, so the formation of a small new plant, and thus creates, let's say, a non-genetic plant-human monster. The latest one was Strange Encounters, where there's a micro-performance that unfolds when human cancer cells meet algae, and they start interacting in surprising ways. I've actually done several projects that also diverge from the biological a bit, and yet still kind of stay in the same sphere, mental sphere. Voyager 140 AU is a project about sending an algorithm that is like a simple mathematical equation that symbolizes a metabolic loop onto Voyager 2, in a way of questioning the autonomy or this entity that is the space probe that has passed its scientific mission and yet still exists there. And would this be art for non-humans or art for no one in this way, but also how this scientific trash turns into an artwork, something that is extremely meaningful by this simple gesture of intervening with a non-scientific, non-industrial thought. Becoming a Thing is the latest project I've done in collaboration with Miha Turšić, and it explores the semantics of algorithms, and on this level that emerges without using them for what they were intended for, but by sort of daisy chaining them together and seeing what comes out of complete nonsense, you know, as sort of this essence of their bias, in a way. I've also done a rad project with circadian drift or solar displacement. It was huge. It was exploring circadian rhythms and how rats can be used as bioindicators of human circadian rhythms because they act very similarly. So we just connected through the mobile phone the light conditions in humans and then transmitted that to the rats, and the rats were now adapting to this erratic lights on, lights off situation, artificial light, and responding by being stressed, as probably our bodies are as well. But we still have to get up at 7 or 6. The Plant Sex Consultancy was a collaboration. It was kind of funny. We came together with designers and architects and thought about this plant alterity, and it seemed like sex or sexual reproduction is something that does, in a way, connect plants and humans in principle. But of course, sex toys are something solely human, cultural, and we kind of used the word sex toys, but actually made sort of reproductive assisting devices for plants that have, for some reason or another, not been doing so well, usually because they have been transplanted to another place by humans where their natural partners of reproduction are missing. I'm talking about birds or bees.